You know, whether you work on a factory floor or from a laptop at home, the idea of workers banding together to have a voice, well, it's as relevant today as it's ever been. But where did it all start? In this explainer, we're going to unpack the story of trade unions from their pretty revolutionary beginnings to the massive impact they've had on almost every job you can think of.
To really get why unions were even necessary, you have to rewind the clock to the Industrial Revolution. And wow, this poem just captures the feeling of that time perfectly, doesn't it? Workers felt completely powerless. They were creating all this incredible wealth, but they were seeing almost none of it themselves. This feeling of deep injustice, that was the soil where the whole idea of collective action started to grow.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the huge power imbalance that kicked this whole thing off. Then, we'll see how workers got organized to finally get a voice. We'll pop open the union's toolbox to see how they work. Look at the major challenges they've had to face, and then we'll wrap it all up with their incredible legacy.
Okay, let's dive in. Picture the scene. The industrial age. We're talking massive factories, brand new machines, and a totally new and often pretty brutal relationship between the person signing the checks and the person doing the work.
So this slide gets right to the core of the problem with this concept. Individual dispensability. What does that really mean? Well, think about it. To a factory owner, any single worker was just a tiny, replaceable part in a giant machine. If you dared to complain about the long hours, or the dangerous conditions, or the fact that you couldn't feed your family on your wages, you were fired. Just like that. And there was always someone else desperate for a job waiting to take your place. As one person, you had basically zero power.
And this right here, this shows you the whole story in one simple chart. It's the problem and the solution side by side. As one worker, you're dispensable, you have no voice, you're powerless. But what if all the workers stood together? Suddenly, the whole equation flips. You go from being easy to replace to being very hard to replace. You get a collective voice and, this is the key, real bargaining power.
So this was it. This was the light bulb moment. The second that workers realized, hey, wait a minute, they can fire one of us, but they can't fire all of us. Everything changed. That single thought was the spark that lit the flame for the entire trade union movement.
So, how did this big idea actually turn into real action? Well, that brings us to Chapter 2, the birth of collective power. This is where workers started getting organized to really flex that newfound strength. And the form that organization took was the trade union. The goal was simple, but at the time, totally revolutionary. Give workers a single, unified voice to negotiate for the absolute basics. We're talking about things that, honestly, we kind of take for granted today, like a safe place to work, decent hours, and a fair wage for a day's work.
Now, not all unions looked the same. They organized in a few different ways. You had craft unions, which were just for workers with a specific skill. Think carpenters or printers. Then you had industrial unions, which brought together everyone in a particular industry, from the folks on the assembly line to the people sweeping the floors. And finally, general unions cast the widest net, open to pretty much anybody from all kinds of different jobs.
Okay, so they're organized. Now what? How did unions actually, get stuff done? Let's take a look at the tools they developed to really push for change.
The number one tool in the toolbox, the big one, is collective bargaining. Instead of every single person having to go to the boss's office and try to negotiate a better deal, which we've already seen didn't work, the union elects representatives to negotiate for everybody at once. It's the absolute heart of what most unions do.
The process pretty much follows these steps. Workers organize, the union represents them, they start bargaining, and hopefully they reach a fair deal. But, and this is a big but, what happens if the company just says no? If they refuse to budge? Well, that leads us to the union's most powerful and often most controversial tool of all.
Yeah, when talks break down, the last resort is often a strike where everyone just refuses to work. And they come in all shapes and sizes. A really fascinating one is the slowdown strike. The workers don't actually walk off the job, they just slow everything down. It's a clever way to hit the company's profits without the workers having to lose their whole paycheck.
But let's be real. The road for unions has never been easy, not by a long shot. They've faced enormous challenges, both from powerful forces on the outside trying to crush them, and from some tricky problems right inside their own ranks.
From the outside, the opposition was just fierce. In the early days, governments were passing laws that literally made it a crime for workers to organize together. A criminal conspiracy. Employers, as you can imagine, fought back against any challenge to their total control.
And it wasn't even weird for unions to be spied on by government agents or people hired by the company.
But maybe one of the toughest challenges, one that's still around today, comes from the inside: member apathy. It's one thing to be a member and pay your dues. It's a whole other thing to actually show up and participate. Just look at these studies from Great Britain. They found that attendance at local union meetings was often shockingly low.
And this chart just puts it in stark perspective. When your attendance is that low, it means a tiny, tiny fraction of the members are making all the decisions for everyone else. That kind of apathy makes it really hard for a union to stay strong and truly represent what its members want.
And then there's infighting. Yep, political disagreements and different ideas about the right way to do things have often caused splits. You'd end up with multiple rival unions inside the same industry. So instead of having one big, powerful voice, you get a bunch of smaller, weaker ones, sometimes fighting each other more than the boss.
But despite all those challenges, from the outside and the inside, the impact that the trade union movement has had on the way we work today is, well, it's absolutely undeniable. It's profound.
This timeline from India is a perfect way to see that impact in action. You can literally track the progress as the labor movement gained strength. It started with laws to regulate child labor. Then the big one, the Trade Unions Act, which gave them legal status. It continued with laws to settle disputes fairly, and even laws that made a minimum bonus mandatory. These rights weren't just handed over. They were fought for, inch by inch.
So the bottom line is, so many of the things we just consider a normal part of work, the 8-hour day, the weekends, safety rules, Social Security, protection from being fired for no good reason, all of these things have deep roots in the union movement's long, hard fight. Which brings us right up to today. The way we work is changing so fast. We have people working all over the globe, remote work is now normal, and the gig economy has just exploded. It leaves us with this huge question. In this brand new world, what does the future of collective action for workers even look like? How will they organize to make sure their voices are still heard?
If this dive into the forces that shaped our modern workday got you thinking, do us a quick favor and hit that like button, share it with someone you think would find it interesting, and definitely subscribe for more explainers on the big ideas that define our world. Thanks for watching.